Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Office on Violence Against Women Fiscal Year 2024 Pre-Application Information Session for the Research and Evaluation Initiative Program. On behalf of the Office on Violence Against Women's Performance Assessment Research and Evaluation team, we welcome you to this call. My name is Kaya Jackson, and I am a program analyst at OVW and a member of the Research and Evaluation team, also known as R&E. I'm joined by my colleagues, Ginger Barron and Olivia Storrs. For the duration of this information session, American Sign Language and Spanish interpretation will be made available. Applicants that require a paper copy of these materials should contact 202-307-6026 or email ovw.research@usdoj.gov. Before we get started, you may find it helpful to have the R&E solicitation in front of you for a point of reference during this information session. There is a lot of information to cover, so we will stop periodically to allow for questions. However, there will be moments when we will need to move on to ensure all information is covered before the end of this webinar. The purpose of the pre-application information session is to highlight a few key points in the solicitation. However, it is not the intent, nor is there sufficient time to go over every aspect of the solicitation. Therefore, today we will cover an overview of the Office on Violence Against Women, also known as OVW, an overview of the Research and Evaluation Initiative solicitation, federal award information, eligibility information, mandatory program requirements, registration, application components, and key submission information, as well as application review information. And we may be unable to address all the information included in the PowerPoint. However, the slides will be posted for your reference. And we kindly ask that you submit all questions in the Q&A box to ensure that we can capture them all. We will read the questions aloud so all participants know which question we are responding to. We will also try not to repeat the question if it's already been answered, so your attention to the questions and answers is important. So the Office on Violence Against Women, as you may or may not know, OVW is a component of the United States Department of Justice. It was created in 1995, and we administer grant programs authorized by the Violence Against Women Act, also known as VAWA. As well as subsequent legislation, and OVW provides leadership on issues of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking. And our grants support coordinated community responses to hold offenders accountable and serve victims. So OVW has priorities this year that cut across all of our grant programs, and you can find them reflected in the solicitation on pages 8 and 9. So next, I'll provide an overview of the R&E initiative. We'll discuss the purpose of the program, what's new about the program, topics for research and evaluation, areas of study, and out-of-scope activities. So the R&E program is authorized by 34 USC 12291B7. And the purpose of the R&E initiative is to research and evaluate approaches to preventing and addressing domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking. The initiative is designed to support researcher-practitioner partnerships to study VAWA-funded strategies for serving victims and holding offenders accountable. And by generating more knowledge about strategies for serving victims and holding offenders accountable, communities that benefit from VAWA funding will be better equipped to align their work with practices that are known to be effective, as well as build their own capacity to evaluate new and promising ways of doing things. And so what's new about this OVW program? So first, the budget cap is increased. And applicants may now submit proposed budgets for up to $500,000 for the 12 to 36-month award period. Also, topics under which OVW is inviting proposals have been updated since last year's solicitation. And the expected products section has been updated since last year's solicitation. So this next section, I'm going to spend a few additional minutes on. If you would like to follow along, the topics begin on page 6 of the solicitation. So topics for R&E include evaluations of VAWA-funded interventions. And VAWA-funded intervention refers to any activity that is funded or could potentially be funded through OVW grant programs to address sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, and stalking. Next, evaluations of training, strategies, policies, practices, tools, and other means of fostering trauma-informed law enforcement and prosecutorial responses to sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, and stalking. And so applications for research under this topic must address how the Department of Justice's 2022 policing guidance ties to the proposed research. Next topic, restorative practices. Applicants may propose to study restorative practices related to domestic violence, dating violence, and/or sexual assault. And please note that OVW will be issuing a separate funding announcement to invite applications to evaluate the restorative practices pilot program. So that'll come out sometime this year, and those parameters for the restorative practices pilot program are outlined in the 2022 reauthorization of VAWA. And so next we have research and evaluation on LGBT specific services, outreach, training, education, and prevention. And applicants may propose to study services and programs designed by and for members of LGBT communities for the purposes of understanding if, how, and why an intervention, one, meets the needs of LGBT victims, two, is effective at educating people about and preventing gender-based violence against LGBT people, and/or better equips professionals to respond to LGBT victims of gender-based violence. And so I just want to reference that in this solicitation, gender-based violence refers to domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, as well as other forms of interconnected violence. So additional topics include research and evaluation on ways of ensuring language access and responses to gender-based violence. Applicants may propose to examine policies, practices, strategies, tools, etc., used to ensure that victims of gender-based violence have meaningful language access to services and supports and can fully participate in justice proceedings. Next, another topic, evaluation of training curricula, tools, and other technical assistance resources developed and implemented with OVW grant funds. And so please note that TA providers can be practitioner partners on R&E applications under this specific topic, but TA providers should not apply to lead an evaluation of their own TA and training. So for example, a TA provider may be a project partner of another organization that applies to evaluate a model that perhaps the TA provider created. And if you have more questions about that, feel free to reach out to us and we can provide some additional guidance. Next topic, secondary data analyses related to domestic and dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking. And then the next topic, research, evaluation, and data analysis related to domestic violence, homicide prevention. And so applicants proposing projects under this area which may fall under additional topics listed above, may address interventions designed to help prevent domestic violence homicides, as well as analyses of data related to domestic violence homicides and efforts to prevent them. So the next two slides will cover specific topic areas related to evaluations of emerging innovations for serving victims of gender-based violence. So the first we have here listed is flexible financial assistance, or other ways of mitigating survivors' financial insecurity resulting from victimization and/or offsetting costs related to their safety, stability, and healing. Next, strategies for serving justice-involved, incarcerated, and/or formerly incarcerated survivors, and means of supporting survivors' recovery that cover a wide range of healing interventions, including but not limited to somatic interventions, art therapy, writing workshops, yoga, massage, animal-assisted interventions, self-defense and martial art classes, community engagement, and other ways of healing that are rooted in cultural traditions. And finally, our last three areas of evaluations of emerging innovations: connecting community violence intervention strategies that address gang and gun violence with efforts to prevent and respond to gender-based violence. This research may also focus on the impact of gender-based violence on violence interrupters and credible messengers. We're also interested in evaluations addressing approaches to addressing the safety, healing, and justice legal needs of survivors from historically marginalized and underserved communities whose lives intersect with the child welfare system. And then finally, engaging culturally specific organizations, community-based organizations, youth-serving and youth-led organizations in prevention and response programming. R&E applications that involve approaches that compromise victim safety and undermine offender accountability may receive point deductions during peer review and may be removed from consideration altogether. This could include activities listed in the solicitation companion guide, as well as methods that aren't in keeping with the methodological principles outlined in the solicitation, which we'll get to shortly. And so on this slide, it's basically summarizing and letting you know that the solicitation lists out of scope activities, and that can be found on page 9. Be sure to look at that section and inquire with us if you have any questions, as out of scope applications may be moved from consideration. And so OVW is interested in funding research and evaluation topics that will contribute to knowledge in the following 6 areas of study shared on the screen. And so more information about the areas of study can be found on pages 9 and 10 and the solicitation. And the areas of study are justice, victims' needs, cultures, disparities, and access, impact, indicators of success, and promoting decedents and reducing recidivism. Decedents and reducing recidivism. And so I am going to pause here for questions and to see if we have anything in the chat box or the Q&A. All right. So we have a question. The first question I see is, can you provide a link or information about how to find more about the restorative practices topic that is in the 2002 reauthorization of VAWA? And I think you may have meant the 2022 reauthorization, Susan, but You can find more information in the statute, and it looks like Ginger, my colleague Ginger, has added a link to the chat box if you all are interested in learning more about the Restorative Practices program. Thank you, Ginger. Next question, is there a certain software used to collect data? Ramona, we don't dictate software R&E applications should use, and Ginger also answered that question in the chat box. Next, we have a question, what about a proposal that focuses on the perpetrator of intimate partner violence in an effort to promote victim safety? So Derek, that sounds in line and in scope with the R&E solicitation. If you have more specifics about what that looks like as far as research on like the perpetrator, you can let us know. But it does sound to be in line with the solicitation as well as our priority areas. Our next question, how does the matching with grantees happen if we are interested in a particular category? So based on Ginger's answer, and I also want to add to this, that OVW does not match R&E applicants to grantees. So we don't do cost matching for the R&E program. Applicants can propose to evaluate interventions that are currently OVW funded, like a current grantee, or could be OVW funded, but something that falls in line with the scope of at least one OVW grant program. All right, I'll try to get to maybe a few more questions and then we'll pick up the rest during the next Q&A session. Could you talk about the likelihood of projects being funded if they are responsive to the priorities of OVW, but not exactly to the specific topics listed on pages 6 through 9? So could you talk about the likelihood? Okay, so we, and Ginger, feel free to hop in here if I'm not answering this correctly, but we are not going to deduct points or not consider an application because it doesn't align specifically with like OVW's overarching 4 priority areas. We're not counting against that, but you do want to, in your application should be responsive to the solicitation, to the areas of study, as well as in line with our methodological principles. But we, if it's not necessarily answering one of the 4 priority areas that OVW has set, it can still be considered for R&E. And I hope that answers your question. And if not, please let me know. All right, and I'll do one more and then we'll get to the rest because I see a bunch coming in. For emerging innovations, if OVW funds evaluation of such innovations with this grant, what is the possibility that such innovations would be funded by OVW as a new funded program or activity if the evaluation find that if it's found to be effective? So, and Ginger responded to this question. All grant programs have competitive processes and solicitations that outline criteria against which applications are reviewed. So there is no guarantee about future funding. So I'm going to move on for the sake of time, but we'll continue to answer your questions as best we can in the chat and in the Q&A box. Please continue to add them and we'll get to them when we're able to. So next we're going to discuss federal award information. And so this slide provides information at a glance about the R&E initiative solicitation. It provides the grants.gov number, the CFDA number if you needed. As mentioned earlier, the award period is between 12 and 36 months. The funding levels, the funding levels are up to $500,000 this year. Registration for the System for Award Management, which is also known as SAM, and grants.gov should happen no later than March 19th. It's encouraged. This is not a required deadline by OVW, but we do encourage you as soon as you can to begin registering for these systems. There could be unexpected delays, anything could happen. So we do encourage you to register for these systems ahead of time. The grants.gov closing date for this opportunity is April 9th, 2024, 11:59 p.m. Eastern. The Just Grants closing date is April 11th, 2024 by 8:59 p.m. Eastern. And we anticipate, or the period of performance start date will be November 1st, 2024. And we anticipate letting folks know by October 1st, 2024. So the award period and amounts. So the budget cap, as mentioned earlier, the budget cap of $500,000 includes direct and indirect costs. Budgets, including the total estimated funding requested on the SF424 form, must reflect the requested project duration, and that should be no more than 36 months. We'll talk about the SF424 form in a little bit. R&E awards are typically in the range of $300,000 to $500,000. All awards are subject to the availability of appropriated funds and any modifications or additional requirements that may be imposed by law. Budgets should include funding for accessibility and compensation for project partners and research participants. And for more information on budget requirements, please see page 17 of the solicitation. And for more information on funding restrictions and unallowable costs, please see page 19 of the solicitation. So I will not read this screen aloud, but this information is basically highlighting the following entities that are eligible to apply for R&E initiative funding, ranges from nonprofits to those who do not have status with the IRS, nonprofits without status with the IRS, faith-based communities, tribal organizations, and governments. But more information about eligible applicants can be found in the solicitation. And I also want to note that an applicant may submit more than one application as long as each application proposes a different project in response to the solicitation. And subrecipients may be a part of multiple proposals. So it is critical that applicants follow all the instructions in the solicitation and get started early so that there's time to troubleshoot any issues you encounter. If you have questions, please reach out. Seemingly minor errors or missed items can result in an application being deemed incomplete or ineligible, or can interfere with getting the application submitted on time. And so a lot of work goes into preparing a grant application, and you don't want a minor oversight to result in your application not moving forward to peer review. So next we'll discuss program requirements. This section of the solicitation describes the requirements of the R&E initiative, including methodological principles to which grantees must adhere, regulations regarding confidentiality and human subjects protection, and expected products. If you would like to follow along in the solicitation, this specific information, begins on page 11. So methodological principles for the R&E program. So any project funded under this solicitation must adhere to the methodological principles listed below. OVW will only support research methods that are well matched to the purpose of the research and build on existing evidence, uphold victim safety as the paramount objective, with the understanding that scientific progress is always subordinate to that objective, are likely to yield findings that have practical utility for victim services providers and justice system professionals, are developed collaboratively between researchers and practitioners, place as minimal a burden as possible on crime victims, offenders, and systems, operate from a cogent theoretical framework, and lastly, have been approved by an institutional review board, or IRB, if they involve human subjects research. OVW will not support research that prioritizes scientific rigor over practical value or ethic. Ethic being broadly defined and not limited to published standards. OVW will not support research that is minimally useful to practitioners or offers minimal cost benefit, lacks a clear theoretical foundation, and or is designed to generate descriptive findings that emphasize vulnerabilities and neglect strengths of specific populations. Any recipient of an award under this solicitation will be required to comply with DOJ regulations on confidentiality and human subjects protection. Applicants must submit a privacy certificate with their application, but you do not need to have IRB approval at the time that you apply. If you receive a grant, you will need to provide documentation of IRB approval or exemption post-award. As mentioned, we've updated the list of expected products for this year's solicitation. One or more presentations made via webinar conferences. Next, scholarly products, one or more scholarly products that are published or submitted for publication, meaning peer-reviewed, scientific journal articles, and or, if appropriate, law review journal articles, conference papers, things like that. New this year, we've asked potential applicants, or applicants are expected to submit one or more 1 to 2 page research briefs written in plain language and intended for practitioners and or the general public. The brief should include a summary of the study, goals and objectives, research questions, methods, results, key findings, and limitations. And finally, if awarded, recipients of an award under the solicitation will be expected to submit a final research report. And the final research report should be written in a way that makes the content accessible to a broad audience, which includes practitioners, policymakers, and other researchers. All right, so next I'm going to talk a little bit about the System for Award Management, which is also known as SAM, and the grants.gov registration process. And so this section describes registration details, content of application submission, as well as key submission information and date. And so the cover of the R&E solicitation provides additional information on registering. And so you can also refer, if you're following along in the solicitation, to pages 25 through 27 for more information on the registration process as well as due date. And so submitting a complete application before the deadline involves registering in 3 different places: SAM, grants.gov, and just grants. The solicitation and these slides lay out those steps in greater detail. If you think you are going to apply to R&E, we recommend you immediately refer to this section and get started right away so that you'll be in good shape to submit your application. And so, again, I want to emphasize that registration with SAM and grants.gov must be completed before an applicant can register with Just Grants. Again, we strongly encourage you, but it's not required, but we strongly encourage you to begin the registration process and to ensure that all of your accounts are up to date by March 19th. And so the 2 forms, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the application for federal assistance form, which is also known as SF-424. And applicants must complete this form in grants.gov. And this form is generated when the applicant begins the submission process in grants.gov. So it'll already be in the system for you to fill out. Next, the disclosure of lobbying activities form. It's also known as the SFLLL form. All applicants must complete and submit the disclosure of lobbying activities form in grants.gov. Applicants that expend any funds for lobbying activities must provide the information requested on the disclosure of lobbying activities form. Applicants that do not expend any funds for lobbying activities should enter NA in the required fields. And then last thing to note, the standard applicant information section in the Just Grants application is pre-populated with the SF424 data submitted in Just Grants. And so applicants are required to review the standard applicant information and make edits as needed. You'll want to confirm the authorized representative, verify the legal name and address, and enter the zip codes for the areas affected by the project. And so you can refer to page 15 of the R&E solicitation for additional information on completing and submitting the application for federal assistance. All right, so I'm going to stop here and see, I know that we had a handful of questions come in. Okay, we had a question. I am still struggling a bit with the VAWA funded or potentially VAWA funded programs. I'm interested in evaluating a program that is funded through the CDC Rape Prevention and Education Program. I believe that the program was originally VAWA funded, but it is not OVW funded. Does that fit? So yes, so we do recommend you reaching out to us directly so that we can provide additional guidance on whatever intervention you're considering evaluating and to ensure it's in scope. So if you could reach out to us, that would be great. So next, does the PI's organization have to do the majority of the work or receive the majority of the budget? Could a partner organization evaluate their own program with oversight from an objective PI? So as Ginger shared, this question does come up a lot, and it's really dependent on the specifics of an application. Your application should ensure that research integrity and independence, should ensure research integrity and independence. And peer reviewers and OVW may identify concerns about an application and which entity is evaluating their own work. So even if the direct applicant is not that entity. So yeah, as Ginger shared, the researcher practitioner partnerships aren't always as clear cut. You can reach out to us. Peer reviewers do also flag that information for us. If you have more specific questions, you can reach out to us. Let's see. Is evaluation of a teen dating violence prevention curriculum and its impact on under-resourced communities and urban areas in alignment with this funding opportunity? I agree with Ginger, that certainly sounds within R&E's scope. We have another question. Are we able to use part of the funds to hire a full or part-time staff member to implement or evaluate the training we are proposing? That's a great question. The answer is yes. Another great question that came in before I move forward, to clarify, the grant can be submitted through grants.gov or Just Grants, or are both platforms required? So both. Again, it's a two-step process. You'll begin the process in grants.gov, and then you'll finish the process in Just Grants. There is a section in the solicitation that lays out this process and associated deadlines, and I'll talk just a little bit more about this before we wrap up. For the sake of time, I'm going to keep moving. We'll have another opportunity to go through questions, but we're going to keep moving. This section describes the content of application components, as well as additional components required for each application. So letters of intent are encouraged, but not required. You can submit a non-binding letter of intent by March 1st to ovw.research@usdoj.gov. Interested applicants who do not submit a letter of intent are still eligible to apply. And for more information, please see the application and submission information section of the solicitation on page 13. A sample letter of intent is also available on the OVW website. So all applicants must include the following 4 components: a proposal abstract, a proposal narrative, a budget detail worksheet and narrative, and required appendices. Applications that do not include these components will be considered substantially incomplete and will not be considered for funding. The proposal abstract should be no more than 400 words, and it should summarize the proposed project in plain language, including the project title, the purpose of the project, goals and outcomes, primary activities, intended beneficiaries, and sub-recipient involvement if that's known. Lastly, the abstract does not count against the page limit for the proposal narrative. The proposal narrative must include the 5 sections identified in the solicitation, and it's important to address the criteria outlined for each section found on pages 16 through 17 of the solicitation. The 5 sections are statement of the problem, project design and implementation, potential impact, capabilities and competencies, and a dissemination plan. The proposal narrative must not exceed 30 double-spaced pages and 11-point font with 1-inch margins. It should have a title page. The proposal narrative should have a title page, which includes information like a project title, submission date, name and contact information, the authorized representative, your principal investigator or PI, any co-PIs on the project, as well as a table of contents and figures. So if included in the main body of the proposal narrative rather than in the appendices, the tables, charts, figures, and other illustrations will count toward the 30-page limit for the narrative section. The title page, abstract, appendices, including any appended tables, charts, or figures, and government forms, do not count toward the 30-page limit. And so the last thing I would like to note is that if an applicant is proposing, if you are proposing to an experimental or quasi-experimental design, a power analysis must be included. Again, the criteria outlined for each section of your proposal narrative can be found on pages 16 and 17 of the solicitation. Applicants must submit a detailed budget and budget narrative and must upload the associated documentation as an attachment and just grant. OVW strongly encourages applicants to prepare and submit budgets in a spreadsheet using Excel or similar software. The budget worksheet and budget narrative are not scored, but are required for an application to be sent to peer review. The budget narrative must describe each line item requested in the budget and explain all costs included in the budget. On page 35 of the solicitation, Appendix A includes a sample budget information and budget narrative sheet, which reflects a sample budget for a research grant. There's also an archived webinar on OVW's website focused on creating a budget. For a complete list of budget requirements, please see the budget worksheet and budget narrative section of the solicitation on pages 17 through 18. And for additional information on allowable and unallowable cost, please see page 19, which highlights the funding restrictions section. And one additional note that I'd like to add is that in the past, we've seen budgets that include funds for incentives. Incentives are not permitted, but participant stipends are. So you'll want to keep this in mind if you intend to include stipends for research participants in your budget. So provided on pages 21 through 24 in the solicitation are appendices that applicants are required to submit with their applications. If an applicant determines that a particular appendix is not relevant to their application, they can attach a file with the statement to that effect. The appendices do not count against the page limit for the proposal narrative. Again, please refer to pages 21 through 24 in the solicitation for more detailed information on the required appendices. Again, that's pages 21 through 24. They're listed out in the slide, but you can find more additional information in the solicitation. And so there are additional components that a complete application should include. The following components that I'm about to discuss will not be scored, but must be included with your application. Failure to supply this information will result in the application being removed from consideration. Some components will be generated during the application submission process, while others will be uploaded and attached to the application in JustGrants. And so for the sake of time, I'll provide a high-level list of the additional application components, but more information is available in the slides, as well as the solicitation, and this information begins on page 24. So additional application and components include a letter of non-supplanting, a confidentiality notice form, a pre-award risk assessment, and each applicant will submit the pre-award risk assessment. And one thing I'd like to highlight is please do not submit responses from a prior fiscal year without updating them on the pre-award or risk assessment. You'll want to be responsive to all the questions listed in the questionnaire. The summary data sheet will also need to be submitted. You can refer to page 55 in the R&E solicitation for a list of questions that are being asked in the summary data sheet. And so this year, applicants will actually complete these questionnaires in JustGrants, although we do have in appendices B, C, and D of the solicitation, you'll find the questions being asked. More information on indirect cost rate, you can refer to this slide for information on your indirect cost rate. And another application component is the summary of federal funding. Applicants must disclose all current and recent OVW awards, if applicable, as well as any pending applications on which the applicant is a subrecipient. And so applicants also must disclose all other federal grant programs from which the applicant currently receives funding on or for which it has applied for funding in FY 2024 to do similar work. And so this information can be provided in a table. There's an example on the OVW website. And for more information, what should be included on this table, please refer to page 24. And then there will be some questionnaires. So for example, all nonprofit, non-governmental organizations that apply for funding from OVW and have not previously or within the last 3 years received funding from OVW must complete an applicant financial capability questionnaire. And you'll have to attach it with your application in JustGrants. And so in addition, you may or may not be required to submit your current year's audit report, but a template for the applicant financial capability questionnaire can be found on the OVW website. Next, we just have a list of disclosures and assurances. More information can be found on pages 21 and 22. There are 4. Some of these disclosures and acknowledgements will be completed as you move through the application process. And so the last section that we'll cover today will highlight the key submission information. I know we're running low on time, so I'll just get through this information as best I can. On page 14 of the R&E solicitation, you'll find formatting and technical requirements. I won't go through each of these, but all applications must follow the formatting and technical requirements for all the documents that are going to be attached to your application. All right, as we shared earlier, the complete application package, including this solicitation, is available on grants.gov and on the OVW website. all applications must be submitted electronically first in grants.gov and then in Just Grants. And so the remaining application documents are submitted in Just Grants. The deadline for submitting the remaining documents is April 11th. Remember, there are preliminary steps that you'll have to take before you submit those documents. And OVW will not accept applications after the Just Grants deadline, except for severe inclement weather or natural or man-made disasters. And so you can view our policy on late submission request on page 16 of the solicitation. Also, if you're having technical difficulties, please let us know at least 4 hours prior to the deadlines. If it comes down to the wire, please let us know. There's also contact information in the solicitation for the SAM team, Just Grants team, support team, and grants.gov support team if you need additional assistance. Again, the applications will be submitted in 2 steps. First step, your application will be submitted in grants.gov. Second step, the full application, including attachments, will be submitted in Just Grants, and that deadline is April 11th. Just a tip, for the application to be on time, the full application must be submitted in Just Grants by the application deadline. This slide just basically provides contact information for technical issues, so you can refer to this slide if you need to. Applications will be scored based on the degree to which the application responds to each section and addresses each element in each section. So applications will be scored based upon the quality of the response, capacity of the applicant and any partners, and the level of detail provided. Each element must be addressed in the section in which it is requested. Points may be deducted if the applicant does not include the information in the appropriate section, regardless of if it is included elsewhere within the application. So for more details on the review criteria, see the application review information section, beginning on page 28 of the solicitation. And finally, I just want to wrap up with some resources. There's a list of these resources can be found on the OVW website. Some of the links are also in our chat box. Then this slide here quickly highlights some resources that are available as you're creating the budget to be submitted with your application. Over the last couple of years, JFMD, our Grants Financial Management Division, they're the team that reviews your budgets. They have developed a detailed webinar presentation on how to develop a budget to be submitted with OVW application. And so this presentation addresses some of the challenges that you may face with your budgets and provide some insight on OVW's budget review process. And the webinar can be found on the OVW website or on this slide. And then it also includes the uniform guidance and the DOJ financial guide. And so this slide includes contact information. If you have financial questions, you'll want to contact OVW's JFMD. Technical questions for grants.gov or Just Grant support is also included in the solicitation, as well as these slides. And if you have questions anytime about the solicitation, you can reach out to myself, or please send an email to the ovw.research@usdoj.gov email inbox. We try to be responsive and get back to you within 24 to 48 hours. And so I know that was quite a bit of information to cover. We have 3 minutes to spare, and I'm just going to pull up the chat and Q&A, but I see that, Ginger, you've responded to quite a few questions, and I don't think we'll have time to go through each of you all's questions. We can put together a Q&A document with all of the questions that we've been asked today, and we'll provide responses, and we'll share that. It'll be posted on the OVW website. We'll work with Leidos to get the recording, the transcripts, the Q&A document to you all, but we do appreciate your questions. And so, Ginger, I'm wondering, do you have any unanswered questions? Or I see one here. It says, I think you answered above, about the teen dating violence program question, but just to confirm, we can evaluate violence prevention programs outside of the criminal justice system, correct? Yes, that is correct. We welcome applications to study and evaluate violence prevention programs outside of the criminal justice system. All right, well, we will again share the slides and an event recording. We hope we were able to get to all of your questions today, and we appreciate you joining. If you have additional questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to us at ovw.research@usdoj.gov. We look forward to answering your questions, and good luck with your application. Thank you for your time today.